Is there anything in particular that people are interested in just raising? Because there's so much going on at the moment. I find, as Richard said earlier, I mean, I was at two conferences last week, um, and I know that there was, Devonshire's had another one on Monday. So there's all sorts of things going on. Ben, what are you looking from this? Is there anything particular you're interested in?
Yeah, in terms of competence, it would be great to understand how are other people representing that, and what are we looking for? I think um, from a professional's standpoint, from the professional team, I'm not really concerned in that it's really relatively easy for say a structural engineer to demonstrate that they're competent if they're a chartered structural engineer and they've designed loads of tall buildings successfully in the past. That's quite easy for them to demonstrate they're competent. But from a contractor's point of view, it's really difficult, and I would be really keen to understand how other people are managing that successfully.
I think that's a really interesting point because competence, it needs to be applied to context, because
Totally.
you may have a qualification for doing something, but it actually isn't relevant to that particular task of doing it in that context. And with the new legislation, people like John, for example, from Origin, um, as a client, you've got to determine whether your supply chain are competent, and you indeed as Ballymore, you're also looking at your supply chain, aren't you? And
Absolutely, yeah.
and actually, your supply chain is also complex, isn't it? Because you might have an M&E subcontractor, and then under them, they'd have their own subcontractors. So you've got a whole range of different complexities there. And the way the legislation has been framed doesn't get into the detail of that. They just leave that as being a liability and responsibility, which
and the mapping of that is really quite complex. I in my conversations with the regulator, I was saying, right, I've got to replace one fire door, which has been knocked down by the police because the resident was not cooperating. So I've gone to the regulator and said, do I need to do a Gateway 2 application for this? Because it's in HRB. And they've said, yeah, you do. So, okay. I've got a competent contractor. It was the same contractor that installed the original fire door, and they're BM Trada Q Mark accredited. Is that evidence that they're competent? No. Okay. So I've got to go through a root and branch demonstration of competence through 8, 6, 7, 1, 2, and 3 to prove that this contractor is competent. And the contractor is just saying, look, I can install you a door, but piss off if you want me to jump through all these hoops.
Well, so just building on that, I was at that particular example was raised.
Okay.
I was at I was at a conference one of the two I was at, the Risk Flag one on Tuesday. This client, Abri, I think it was, they said they needed to do exactly what you just said there, replace a door, and they needed therefore a principal designer to be involved. They couldn't get anybody to be the principal designer for it. This is a replacement door.
Yeah.
But to get somebody to do it, it was going to cost £2,000 to be the principal designer. The door was 1,500.
Yeah. So in this instance, I had the same issue, but I've stepped in and said, I'll be the principal designer and principal contractor, and here's all my evidence that demonstrates I'm competent.
Yeah.
And that wasn't really an issue. But from the contractor side, the fact that they're like third party accredited by BM Trada wasn't adequate, and they need more. And for fire doors, it's relatively it's not even the most complicated piece. What about a facade?
Yeah.
How do you just demonstrate that a facade contractor's competent? It'd be really helpful if there was some sort of like we knew what we were aiming for here, because at the minute we're just shooting. We're doing loads of work, and we don't know whether it's enough, too much. Don't know.
Well, fortunately, Paul McSolly's just joined, and Paul's got all of the answers. So, yeah.
You're on mute, Paul. Sorry.
Sorry, I wouldn't say I've got all the answers. So, how is everyone? Okay.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah. So, what Ben was just talking about there is a topic that actually has been flying around for the last week, from my perspective, and that is if you're going to replace if you've got a fire door that's damaged and you want to replace it with basically a replacement fire door by the contractor that did it originally, for example, that's a Gateway 2 application, and simply having a competent contractor that's registered with BM Trada, for example, that's not adequate to demonstrate competence. And as part of that process as well, I was saying that last week at one of the conferences, the need for having a principal designer and a principal contractor on it, one of the clients said that they needed to replace a door, which was going to cost them 1,500 quid, to get somebody to step in and be the principal designer on that. It's going to cost them £2,000. So there's no point in us railing against this. It's the way it is. But I think as an industry, we need to have some practical, solutions. The other thing, just before I go off that, Daz and I were down at the Devonshire's conference last Wednesday, and Andrew Mellor and some of the other, a couple of other people, they ran something on what is building work. And as part of the process, they were talking about scheme design. Is it scheme design? Scheme, something like that?
Scheme work, yeah.
Scheme work, yeah. The scheme work, if the scheme is, there's certain types of scheme work, and it has to be underwritten by the organisation that runs that scheme. And they have checked with all of the scheme work providers, and none of them will underwrite any BSA work.
Yeah, correct. I didn't realize somebody else was doing that, but I've come to the same conclusion. So I checked them all, and some of the advertised ones, for example, BM Trada, are not on it anymore.
Yeah.
And basically, unless you're doing gas work, like replacing a boiler, fairly basic electrical work, or replacing a PVC window, then pretty much nothing else is covered.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, Ben. And I think that's those organisations are written somewhere into the Act in the legal documents. There's from James King from Devonshire's, who was had gone through it, line by line from a legal point of view, and then I think Andrew Mellor had done the same. So I think what George and I and Richard was talking about just in preparation for this going forward, I guess we've done a lot of work in terms of trying to understand the regulations and the workflows, which is kind of culminated in the kind of the Miro board and the PDFs that Jarek started setting up, and then everyone's contributed into. So I guess it'll be useful, and I've tried to use it recently, and I realized there's a link missing for guidance. So it would be good if people do continue to, I guess, use it and highlight whether there's any errors or additional information that's come out, whether it's government guidelines, diagrams, etc., to make sure that that is still up to date and relevant. We can share that link again and the password that Jarek set up. But I thought it would be useful going forward. It's a year on, to look at exactly as you were saying, Ben, as well. What are the actual kind of real case studies or scenarios? And I'm thinking back to when we had this discussion about BIM and BIM level 2 and all those kind of 10, 15 years ago. It was when case studies became more available, good or bad, that it really then started to build traction in terms of upskilling everyone and the competency, I guess, of everyone. So what I'm sort of doing what I would like to do today is actually on the conference that George and I were at with Devonshire's, I was asked to kind of present about how DMA are kind of looking at the role of the PD and how we developing our competence within the organization. I'd like to go through that, but then invite others to maybe share their findings in subsequent meetings or by sharing documents or little scenarios, so that as a design group we are able to help other designers, whoever they may be, in sort of collating some sort of scenario. And maybe that could be just simple bullet points or a bullet point and a website link or something like that. And that can be shared in a hopefully usable, friendly version to the rest of the kind of community. And again, if you've got questions for the other working groups, Richard and George and Jiz can help us kind of share that, and I'll get feedback from it. So if that's okay, I'll go through the slides. Like I said, it was a presentation from last week. It wasn't specific to this, but just to kind of give a snapshot of where we are and generally I think the industry from a design point of view and a principal designer point of view, if that's okay. And then, like I said, hopefully that will help some ways, and then also, like I said, invite others to do the same. And so that this forum becomes now more about case study, sharing real life experience, as opposed to theory, which I think is what everyone's been kind of wrestling with, and will probably continue to wrestle with going forward. But nothing like real life, I guess. Does that make sense to people? Okay, well let me jump into that. So hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep.
Excellent. Like I said, in terms of this, let me just share it through. Flip through. So the presentation was really looking at these four sort of things, DMA, but more importantly, like the status quo and behavior of the existing kind of what I've seen and heard, the duties and competence element, and the innovation and culture that I guess we're using, which I'm sure others are doing as well. But just to give an idea of how we're trying to tackle that question that you asked, Dan, about competency of designers, but also I guess contractors going forward. For me, the interesting things about the Act and obviously the report that came out recently is actually it's quite soft things in a way. This is not about regulations, but about people, their behavior, their competence, and the culture. So I think we're all aware that the actual technical stuff hasn't really changed, but again, it's similar to BIM, where we thought about BIM as a cultural change as opposed to just a software thing. Just reinforcing that actually these are the things that we've got to, I guess, focus on. And I think if you get the culture right, the behavior of the teams, and that will then generate the competency to comply as a way to compliance. I mean, this is just DMA, so I'll kind of skip through that, these things. But one of the things I was trying to communicate was actually this idea of the responsibility of the clients. And I think, we're finding even now we explain to clients that, look, this project, all projects are under the BSA, and they're like, oh, we didn't think it was. So again, it's similar to the when BIM came and BIM level 2. I think there is still a need for upskilling clients, but at the same time, in a way, we are all clients because we may appoint a team under us, which we've done before, and therefore we have to take the role of the client. And also, I think the definition of a designer is pretty broad, similar to CDM, I guess. So I think actually we've got to kind of always imagine that we are the clients and designers, and if you have those two mentality and duties embedded in our thinking, I think that can only be helpful. So I talk about upskilling internally, organizations and individuals, that early engagement, time and resource, all those things which are kind of written in the act. But I think it's that behavior. We do need clients to kind of, and this, I guess the act helps us kind of put that emphasis on them from a statutory point of view, that you're the people who should be leading the behavior of that project, whether it's about the fees or the time or the program, etc. And then these, the good old-fashioned diagram, and to be honest, it could be applied to anything. If you put the effort in early, whether it's to do with compliance or safety or quality, etc., it's much easier later down. And it's a really hard thing. I mean, contractors, I think, have got a harder thing, but there's something like 2 million people involved in the industry, so that's a huge kind of ship to turn as such. But if you break it down to the different organizations, it becomes a bit more bite-sized and a bit more manageable. Small changes in the organizations, and I kind of put this number down here, which is the 50 times the 7 years. This is the average. 50 is the average number of people who are kind of fatally injured or fatalities in construction from I think the HSE website. So in the 7 years since Grenfell, 350 odd people have died, and that's in just building buildings, not occupying them or due to anything that's happening to them. So yes, obviously there was the 72 who died at Grenfell, but it's not like it stopped. This number of people have continued, and CDM and BSA, as in the Paul Bussey presentations in the RIBA, they are interlinked, very much so. But there is a huge amount to learn, and some of the figures that were coming out of the Devonshire in terms of time frames for getting applications were 22 weeks. People were quoting 20 weeks, and this is from I think a report that was in the construction news website. It's not great, because actually everything obviously is taking longer, and a lot of applications are getting rejected, and again, this is the kind of things that will be really useful to understand from yourselves. What are the 2 or 3 things that people that the regulator had rejected your application on? But Dame Hackett, who was the keynote speaker, did give some examples of what they have received, which isn't helping the case at all, because she mentioned 3 scenarios where someone had submitted a Gateway 2 application. I think this is correct, George, had just written, I don't know why I need to do this, was what they had written on the application. Another application just said it complies, it complies, it complies, and someone had submitted just a floor plan, and in terms of demonstrating the building or the project itself. So there's clearly a bit of a very low bar, and one end of the extreme. There's obviously the ones that have got through, clearly good examples that we need to understand and share more about. Again, in the same way that we did with BIM, explaining the benefits, so the pulls of the BSA rather than the push mentality. And I think that's kind of where we are 1 year on. We need to kind of share that more rather than it's been difficult, it's not getting validated quickly, etc. This is from the RIBA, actually, from Hawkins Brown, from the RIBA BSA presentation. Just in terms of our journey as DMA, we're being appointed on 2 schemes which are non-HRB, and then within stage 4. But again, even that one is quite a late appointment, coming back to the client's knowledge and their project managers advice or not advice, taking them off their actual duties. But we've taken that the two diagrams on the left approach, that we can't say that we're fully competent in the process or from a BSA point of view. So we've appointed an advisor to help us. And then as we go through these projects, then we will obviously slowly build up that competence. But there's no way that we could have said we're competent without having done one at least. So that's the kind of mindset, I guess, that we've taken as practice. And just for stage 4, and then the contractor has said they will then obviously take that role on as a DMB project, i.e. the middle diagram, and they will take both roles on. And we will get innovated as the designer architectural kind of role. And then some people obviously got the far right image as the architect being an advisor. But I think there was some, the complications maybe from a legal point of view about conflicts of interest and what happens if something does go wrong. So we've kind of taken the first two diagrams on the left-hand side for these two projects. So I'm looking forward to kind of getting stuck in and then actually learning from doing, because I think, theory can only get you so far. And actually, a presentation that Neil Badley from Sweco gave to us, CPD, I think he made quite an interesting point that actually when it comes, HRBs have got the hard stops, non-HRBs have got these sort of blurred boundaries, and actually that makes it quite hard to understand when does, especially on DMB, when does that designer PD role finish PC, and that makes it harder to kind of figure out. And the advice I could give was, pre-appointment of, let's say, the architectural BSA PD or just the PD and the PC, I think it's worth having a conversation with the client, the potential PC and us before even getting into appointments and fees, just to make sure that we agree here is when our stage 4, let's say, PD role finishes, and then you guys take over in a non-HRB. In a HRB, in a way, it's kind of easier to kind of say, okay, gateway 2 will stop and you start. So till we figure it out, have those open conversations and get that behavior and understanding correct before getting, fees, appointments, legal stuff involved. And then really going back to the clients about resource and time, realistic programs. This is from a real project that we worked on. It was actually 3 projects combined, and the green was the original, the winning tender submission from the contractor, and actually the blue was what actually happened. I mean, it's 2 years, and I'm pretty sure in this kind of, in our groups, this is not a unique scenario. Is it to do with actually people kind of getting the program to work virtually because that is what the client wanted? Is it because the kind of the designing wasn't done early enough, like the McLean graph, and therefore things happened? Obviously, got a bit of COVID in this timeline as well. So clients kind of, I guess, need to be more realistic about their programs, not necessarily be, let's say, politically influenced because of an election or getting a certain amount of housing built by a certain time. Their advisors need to be more realistic to them as well. And I think the contractors, the design team, to be more realistic rather than just saying something to achieve it. It's hard. It's obviously harder to do than just me saying it, but that statute to kind of give reasonable amount of resource and time, I think helps with this discussion and actually setting realistic programs. Moving on to like duties, I think a lot of you will be aware of these documents. Again, I was presenting more to an open audience, but clearly there is guidance. But as George alluded to, it's not that necessarily defined. But I don't think we really expected it to be defined from all the discussions we had about. There was never going to be a checklist that says if you do all these, you demonstrated compliance. It is leaving it open to the particular context that George alluded, which I think is a good thing in a way, because it stops generic documents flying around. I guess in a similar way to the CDM, trying to get away from non-significant risks just being added onto a massive tracker, for example. So we're having to, in DMA, develop case studies or competency when for different sectors, and obviously for the individuals as well. So it's keeping us on our toes, but I think that's a good thing, because then when you do receive a bit of information, it should be particular, and it doesn't necessarily have to be huge. It is proportionate to the project and the context of the project that we're doing. So in a way, not having a a massive checklist should, I think, in a way help us. But again, just showing that information. Again, you'll be aware of these things. So I'm kind of going through that RIBA BSA course. It's giving me nightmares because it's kind of going back to part 3 where you got to do the to get onto the register, you got to do the exam and the case study and Viva. Which so I thought part 3 was the last exam, but clearly not. So it's coming back again. But obviously there are these kind of good documents that are out there that we can use. And I was sharing with the audience the work that everyone's contributed to in terms of the working workflow diagrams that have been developed. So again, just do keep on using that and sharing it. Like that, it's never meant to be a static document or a workflow. So that was kind of just explain to everyone that there is lots of people trying to do good stuff. And the call for arms was about those case studies. And I'm sure you're also part of other groups like the DOHAS, the ATLG. So there's a lot of knowledge sharing going on, which again, I was just trying to show to the audience that there's a lot of free organizations or groups that they could join and to kind of be involved, learn from, and obviously share their knowledge. And then finally, this was just about us, I guess, as a DMA in terms of our thing. I think it's quite unusual, but of the 23 team members of the technical team, there's 25 of us who are actually involved in R&D. That's quite a big number, percentage. But for us, it's in our view, and really very much led by David and Fiona at the sort of top-down approach. That's where the strategy and the culture and the behavior is coming from. But then from bottom up is where the innovation's coming on from. We've got team members from who've done the BIM technician degrees and courses. We've got other people who are leading the specification, so head of specification as part of the R&D team. And again, in terms of CDM and BSA, we're trying to make sure that there is not one person. We want it to be like BIM, that everyone uses the BIM tools. Everyone is aware of CDM. Everyone is aware of BSA to a general level at least. And then the more senior team will be going through the registration process, for example. And for us, we've gone through, like I'm sure yourselves have looked at different software to try and maintain that golden thread, a digital way, and using things that we talked about before about structured data, standardized version control. We've ended up with this sort of, I guess, sort of 5 pieces of software: Notion, MBS, CMAP, and the Autodesk Revit. And I think that feels like we don't need any other. We can do everything that we need to within DMA, common data sort of environment. And we know we can push out and pull in information from other contractors, other designers, so on and so forth. And, again, I think George has mentioned this before. I think I mentioned this, the black box thinking. Interestingly, in airlines, there are the two black boxes. One is actually recording technical events that happen. And the other one actually is basically listening into the conversations between the pilots, and that's in very much the behavior. So I think it's very pertinent in terms of as an analogy between what we are being asked to do with the Building Safety Act. Yes, you've got to get your technical competency and stuff, but actually your behavior and culture is also equally important. And that failure is the very best way to learn, that sort of black box thinking mantra, getting away from a closed loop to an open loop system. And in DMA, we've kind of, within Notion, this sort of, Notion is a bit of software that is a bit like an intranet, like a Google, where we can search and set up pages or views into databases. So it could be a matrix, it could be text, it could be pictures, but all of it's interrelated. That's the kind of the good thing about that database. And within that, we're hosting I'm sure like yourselves, hosting the standards and methods and procedures, but because it's all in one document or one sort of database, we can search for it, or the team members can search for it. Someone isn't there, they can search about how do we comment, what best practice for commenting, how do we deal with clash renditions, so on and so forth, rather than having to open a Word document or an Excel or a PDF. It's all in a live, this live platform called Notion. Again, further things, what we're trying to do in terms of competency, keep in mind we've got, team members who are coming, who are architectural assistants who complete their part 1, part 2, part 3, trying to create in that the ability for those team members to kind of search through to what might be the correct answer for, let's say, part M43 bathroom. So rather than having to read from scratch, we've created the content, the R&D team and the senior team, content and families, which should mean that actually with prompts, you can see on the right-hand side, with prompts to make sure actually is the area correct? Is this model of assembly or family being used in the right context? A bit like, I guess, Expedia, you ask for a particular flight for a particular region for a particular time. So by going through this content library filtering process, hopefully the aim is that the team get to the right answer, and as we go through the projects, the data increases in that. So again, just choosing the different doors, adding fire and acoustics and so on and so forth. So that this is what we don't want necessarily the staff to see, that the general team is the content library, the blurred image on the bottom. So they're all the different scenarios and sub trees of doors that we've got, for example. But we want to use that filtering thing that we built in Notion to be able to actually make sure we choose the right thing. Because if you ask someone who may be junior to choose the right door from that huge list at the bottom, inevitably they're going to get it wrong. And then taking it from individual components to assemblies. Again, as we talked about, I think the team, this team in the call, I'm sure are doing already, so that you're not having to, start from scratch to understand what a compliant bathroom is. And pre-populating, now we have the ability to use parametric info to pre-populate dimension tag with our master specification. And obviously, if you need to change to a particular client's requirements, we can do that much more easily. So this is about creating efficiencies as well as consistency, because to stay competitive, bottom line. And yeah, this is the kind of going from the building regs, developing the buildings, building formulas to make sure that you can't just move a sink just to make it fit, because it'll flag up an issue of compliance. And therefore the culmination of that should be 80% of the building can be from the content library, and let's say 20% might be bespoke. And by keeping that up to date, we then end up with the design working alongside the other designers at a PD role to make sure that at the end of design stage it is compliant. And obviously through variations or change control, we maintain that to make sure that we can issue as built at the end of models or drawings at the end of the projects. And then finally moving on to the regulations, as the PD role, there's various sort of checklists and trackers that RIBA have, for example, and that's the work that I think Dieter has led on and in that book. And we've tried similar things which we're looking to expand on. So this is again a tree of different regulations, K, M, and B, and we're able to use that. So this is a scheme which we inherited. We were asked to kind of look at it, do a due diligence from a contractor client. So we basically rebuilt the design, but because we were using our components, which had clearance zones or exclusion zones or whatever, it was quite quickly we could see where there were issues of compliance, and so we were able to tag that parametrically. Obviously, green being fine, red being an issue, grey maybe being not relevant. So these are kind of tools that we're trying to build to do the PD role, so that we can not just necessarily use the Excel, but it's a great audit trail, I guess, this is from the RIBA DTIRS one, but maybe bring this into Notion so that there's a live version of it, and if you need to, we can export to Excel as moments in time. But we're trying to keep it, like I said, in one ecosystem, so that it is live, it is auditable, there is an audit trail that we could demonstrate if required. And I guess some of the challenges that we see in terms of like competency, how do we maintain that and retain it? You know, if someone moves from the team, what happens? So part of, I guess, building in that competency into the models or the libraries is that it's sort of trying to maintain that. So if team members do leave, we haven't necessarily lost that knowledge or reducing the chance of us losing it. How do we demonstrate competence in new sectors that we might be going into? I don't know. Do you have to buy in, or recruit, or obviously go on courses to understand about? When we were developing our life science, the client actually said, look, you should go and visit and go in, be involved in these seminars and webinars, and that's what we did to pre-BSA. But maybe that's something that we have to do as designers or even clients to demonstrate that about that sector. Program and cost, again, just sort of the viability, the longer programs that I mentioned actually being required, that's going to put pressure on the clients about viability. So how does that get resolved? Procurement is clearly a big part of this, and maybe further funding or grants may need to be obtained. But obviously, again, a bit like the BIM thing, benefits, and we should be looking at the benefits and sharing that of better quality, more certainty in terms of the output, the design once built right, and obviously safety being the key thing. And the last slide here was about these sort of silos of clients, designers, contractors, asset managers, and people obviously being discharging, or they think they're discharging their duties and appointing people to do that. But in a way, I would like it to be more intermingled. I think a negative of the digital, the teams, the pandemic was that we are spending less time physically together on site, together as teams, discussing. Clearly, there's a benefit for what we're just doing. We don't all have to be in the same room now, but clients being more present, maybe on site or in design meetings, designers being more present on site, talking to clerk of works or the subcontractors and the specialists. That I think will, and I every time I go to site, I talk and learn 4 or 5 things every single site visit, and I think that is maybe a physical change that we need to do to improve and demonstrate and show a cultural change of the clients being interested in the project all the way through, the designers being interested in what the contractors are doing, and the contractors being involved and interested in what the asset managers have to do going forward, and then kind of maintain that building. But yeah, so that's sort of just stop sharing that. That's sort of what we were presenting, and there was a broad audience of housing associations, obviously legal members, some kind of design members there as well. But I hope that was a bit of useful in terms of where we are in our journey. And like I said, I think we see it like we did with BIM, led again by David and Fiona. Get involved, get active, and do things. And as Dame Hackett said, get busy, but get busy doing the right thing, not just being busy and walking around with lots of folders or whatever. That was one. I think that was one of her last messages in that keynote speech. So yeah, are there any questions or comments or reflections or anything basically, apart from silence?
That was really good, Andrew. Really good.
Thank you. And I think, like I said, we're pretty early on in our actual appointed role of doing the BSA PD. And in a way, because it's on HRB, we've been working with the same client, same design team, same contractor, actually. We should be doing that across 4 projects in King's Cross. There's already a certain element of familiarity, I guess, which will help us. It should be a softer route in. But for example, like Part T is just come into effect yesterday, and that will, that will be something that people are still trying to figure out, and it will impact designs of projects that they're working on at the moment. Miguel, you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks. Very interesting presentation. Thanks. Quick question about that slide you saw with the tags and the building regulations noted. How that works? Is that it does something related to the families, or is something that you have just as annotation? And do you do any schedule with it? Do you extract any? Do you use that information anywhere else, or do you? Yeah.
Good question. It was a piece of exercise that Andy from our team did. It's a tricky one because it's a bit dangerous because you got the building regs, which have now at least got an amalgamated version on the government website, so that helps a little bit. So what Andy did was actually download that and then extract from it. I don't know why, but I don't. And someone maybe would answer it, but maybe it's a legal issue. But the government website or the building regs are not available as a bit of structured data. It's only available in a PDF, so you have to kind of almost take it apart to generate that those tags. And what we did was, because our families have got built-in, let's say, clearance zones, we could see where there was an issue and therefore apply the relevant building reg issue or compliance tag to it. So it's very much a sort of a manual thing, but you can then schedule those things to generate a color-coded issue, which similar to, I guess, what the Excel that RIBA have issued. You could start to populate that from the findings of what we were doing there. But the danger is that as regulations change, you've got to make sure your database is thing, and that's why if the government did made it more structured, that would be really helpful. But I don't know if anyone's got an answer to that. But I don't know why they haven't made it. You might know, George.
No, I'm sorry. I've just been messaged by Jess. I've just been messaged by Bryony Matthews, has come from the ironmongery sector.
Oh, yeah.
She's apparently been waiting in the lobby for half an hour. Jess, could you see if you can invite her, please?
Yeah.
I think it might be a bit late for her to join, but it would be good for her to be involved because she's in that area. I'm sorry, Daz. Could you ask me the question again?
Do you one of the questions that Miguel asked was about the building regulations compliance tags that we were using, and I was saying that actually took quite a lot of work just to generate those that list for us to then tag things, because the building regs are not available in some sort of structured database. It's available as a PDF, but I don't know why people don't, or the government doesn't issue that. And I thought you may know, or someone else on the call might know. Go on, Anna.
I don't know.
Because no one wants to pay for it to be structured. It's
simple as that.
Follow the money as usual. Really good presentation. I was a little bit interested in those 3 diagrams of where the advisor role can be in the whole.
Do you want to share that
team?
Again?
Could you? Can we just chat about that for a bit? Yeah. Okay, we currently have projects that are going through the full high risk process, and we also have lots of projects that are just normal CDM, and we're providing the CDM both BSA role and normal CDM role. To my understanding, no matter where the advisor is in this kind of relationship, really the advisor never really takes any responsibility for the competence of and for the actual compliance of the project. Yeah. Yes. Therefore, who are these advisors? Why is anyone going to pay them? I mean, this is what we are trying to understand. Yeah. Can anyone?
Paul, you got your hand up? I don't know if you're related to this.
Paul, go for it.
Anna, as always, you are crack on the money for this, right? I mean, no, it's I've been a bit aloof as well, because obviously I went over to that last company as a bit of a rescue mission, and unfortunately it is what it is. But what I'd say is that you're absolutely right, is that the biggest problem I think we all have isn't so much now the golden thread around the documents of Gateway 1, documents of Gateway 3. It all comes down to building regulations compliance statement. I think we'll all probably agree with that. How you state you're complying with building regulations is the problem, isn't it? Right. So when you look at a building regulations PD advisor, and I've sort of said this to the last business, I said it to open market as well, is that the person that advises is going to rely upon the team that's collating the information to give it to them to advise. So you ask yourself, well, what are they doing? Right. So unless you've got a structured way, which comes back to your question about structured data, to give it to them to say, do you know what? And I'm going to use, because it's the easiest one for me to use, probably fire dampers as always, right? Is that I've selected this piece of ventilation kit, right? It's a damper, it sits on a wall. And actually I've gone for a classification of ES, 120 minutes, resilience of C10,000. And actually the Pacific model I'm using in car terms isn't just a standard, say, Mondeo. I'm using an estate version of it. It's the same thing, but it's got a different frame to go in the wall. And actually it's compatible with the wall because the wall's got this thickness, it's got this layers of board, and this thing works with it. You've got to present that to the advisor to say, I think you've given me sufficient data, because they can't do it in reverse. So when you look at it, it's a bit like there's probably a bit of a role missing in industry where you've got someone that's able to collate that information. And I'm not saying you can do it in BIM yet. And I think that I've been in it before, George. I think the problem with this data in BIM is that there is no, I'm going to use your word, ontology to it to describe all those factors. The government's not going to be able to do it because it's so complex. And industry is looking for someone else to pick it up, which no one probably is at the moment. You've got to have a method of presenting it back to them. And the only way we could work out to do it was to do it in Excel format, to say, that's the piece of kit, that's the product. You could say that's the product it goes with. This is how it works together. This is the function it does to protect against the risk in the space to the left of it and the space to the right. And it's how that gets presented is the problem. So I'm with you. I don't think the advisors, when you look at fee structure I was going through at the last business, are going to do that. I don't think they've got the competency to do it, which is the word that came up earlier. And there are others to collate it, to pass it back. So when you look at the tier 1 market, which is still throwing risk all down the line, no one's collating it. There's a whole role missing around collating that information to say, actually, all these products are appropriate to where you're putting them and they work together. That's the bottom line. It's like there's like a role missing. I actually did some diagrams on this, George, as well at the last business. I'll dig them out and I'll send them to you, because I think, and you, Ben, I think you'll like it. I think, because not to harp on, but one of the things that I think hopefully you'd agree with, don't shoot me down, is that even though the principal designer duties are extended via the building regulations, I think it's in, the bottom line is it's not the same role. And one's health and safety, one's technical compliance of building regulations. And I think that's where the problem lies. Everyone's trying to put it under a principal designer, and it's not a principal designer, is it? It's someone that's actually looking at the information, someone else who's collated as the designer, presenting it, convincing that it's compliant to the circumstances where you're using it. And that's where I think the bottom line sits.
I agree. I think the existence of that advisor smacks a little bit to me as, when in 2015 when CDM came out, everyone was like, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" And then the industry worked out that, what we could do is we can just appoint an advisor and then carry on doing what we were doing before.
Yes.
And so all we've got to do is pay like a few £1,000s to somebody, and that ticks a box, and then we just don't need to do anything different. We can carry on. And this seems to me to be born out of that way of thinking, which is fundamentally flawed and incorrect, and it just won't work.
George, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna just I agree absolutely with what Ben's just said there about risk transfer, by the way. But I was going back to something you know when you asked me about the building regs. Yeah, so as I think everybody knows me, I've been harping on about everything being machine readable for probably at least 10 years.
Yes.
And to some extent, I've now ceded defeat on that, in that there's still going to be a lot of stuff that's going to be in PDF documents. And one of the ways that we as ActivePlan have been addressing that is that we've built into our process and our platform the ability to put metadata on documents. So we turn the documents into something that is machine readable, not in a an AI perspective, although we are using some AI. The key thing is just being able to classify them properly, and also to be able to tag the right page in a document that might be a 50 or 100 or 200 page document with specific information that you need to look at. And what we've also done is made it so we can tie that back to a space or a system or an asset or whatever. So the reason I'm saying that, not to promote ActivePlan, the reason I'm saying it is that one solution to this particular scenario, I think, is that if the person that's actually consulting building regs for a particular answer can simply record, put a tag in to say that this is what I looked at when I was making that judgment, then I think that helps it for the principal designer or the principal contractor, because they've got something there that they can then refer to. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, I think the in the RIBA, so you got the RIBA got this sort of GD course, which is for both CDM and BSA. They show examples of a one-person organization or multi-person, and it ultimately they could be as simple analog as just taking a printout of the building regs and scratching the things that are not relevant or is relevant, and scanning that in. In many ways, that is the kind of the analog version to show you've gone through the process to make sure you've identified the regulations that are applicable, discussed with the team, asked the competent team members how they are addressing and aligning to those needs, and documented it through a markup of a printout, for example. I don't think, and as you say, George, there's nothing absolutely wrong with that. We're obviously trying to do a digital version to make it easier to kind of track it and audit it, etc. So that I think they're the two ends of the spectrum. In terms of the advisor role, I'm kind of curious, Paul, to see and Ben, what they do, because we've not worked with them before. And you're right, in a way, when the CDM regulations changed, we did do exactly the same thing in terms of getting an advisor, probably for about a project or two, just because in the scope, I think I got about 3 fee proposals for this advisor role, and they were quite interesting how varied they were. One of them was, sort of, I think like 5 or 6 grand. One that was like ended up being 40, and one was something like in the middle. And interestingly, the most expensive one, they were offering to check every single drawing of every single consultant, of every single subcontractor's drawings, and get specialists internally who might be specialists in fire or acoustics or whatever to go through basically every single drawing, which I thought actually quite good value. So to kind of to do that, to essentially audit like we would do, almost have is another QA process or a new QA consultant, but we didn't want that in this particular scenario. The scope that we've asked the advisor is they're not actually going to be checking anything. They're not taking any liability, as you noted correctly. But we kind of wanted someone almost as just a person to ask a question and just check that we haven't missed something obvious from what the regulation is asking. We would be doing the questioning, the workshopping, the collating of the information / the audit of having gone through that process. But I guess it's just having a friendly ear to kind of be able to ask some of these questions and make sure we haven't missed a critical step identified in the contract, because I'm not a legally minded person, but they have gone through that process. they've also gone that process through with the contractor that we're looking to use. So there is a connection and a relationship already there between the advisor organization and the contractor organization, which I think from that idea of cultural behavior or communication can only help these projects. So it's a very light touch scope that we've agreed with the advisor, but we will be doing the work, holding the workshops and asking the questions. I see the BD role as very much in asking the right questions from the right people and collating that to demonstrate and for submission. So we'll find out. I don't know. I really don't know. So I'll feed back. We've got till the end of sort of December to complete that role. So I will have another presentation about what was good, what was bad, what we learned, and what didn't work as well, and what did work. Any other questions or anything? Or like I said, if anyone has got any other, it doesn't have to be a full presentation like this, but some. Sorry, Anna, did that answer your question, by the way, in terms of going back to that thing for a start?
No, you did in a way that I guess maybe even the role of advisor is in some ways a sort of stepping stone towards general competent, we're all trying to work things out, right? And also some things will only become real once they're proved in practice. So the kind of case law is yet to happen. So we're all trying to find our feet and work out the rule of thumb of what makes sense, what doesn't make sense.
And the way you're right, we're kind of paying for a bit of a safety net and a bit of a friendly hug.
Exactly, we're paying for a bit of a buddy, basically, to take us through that. It's just that slightly different to see to it happening during CDM kind of revolution is that really this person would also have to understand the context of everything that's been coordinated, because looking individually at subcontractor drawings, for example, would mean nothing to someone unless they can understand the context of the entire fire strategy, the entire ventilation strategy, for example, all of that. Therefore, whoever is the designer still has to be the person who is carrying the context. So competency of individual elements is kind of a little bit abstract, basically, and I think that's the bit that sort of even the kind of the industry, when they were writing the rules, kind of missed out to describe and state, which is that unless you have a context, it's a famous last thing that happens to all of us on projects is that, for example, a project manager changes halfway through the project, a new person comes on board, or a design manager, they come on board, they look at everything, they're like, why did you do this? This happens on all projects because some things are not there because they're completely logical. They're there because they are a sequence of decisions that come from a year before or 2 years before when the project was started. And every design has to be understood from that point. Therefore, the person who is looking at stuff, it's like trying to clear up other people's models. You can't clear up somebody's model unless you know how that model has been created, because there are reasons why things are in place and things work with each other. So I think, I agree with you. The advisor person is there to make sure that you don't miss something, to make sure that you're thinking of everything in terms of regulation and stuff, but it can't be the person who can provide the context of the compliance, basically.
Agreed. We're kind of wanting them to help us from a process point of view, not from a compliance point of view.
Very good point.
And you're absolutely right that even I, as the PD with the PD on these schemes, don't have the right detail knowledge. So we will be structuring it where I will actually be working with the project architects, for example, who are much closer to the project, to then help. Because I don't know all the details and the history of the project. So and that's why I guess having a digital audit of the decisions and the conversations, even like recordings of team meetings of those, could become really useful down the line. You know, so yeah, that's how we're saying it. We're kind of seeing it as the advisor being someone who has obviously no legal, statutory, responsibilities, but simply to make sure we haven't missed a step, because it's the first time we're doing it. Once we've done it once or twice, we will generate our own checklist anyway, to go through, and pros and cons or whatever. Sorry, Paul, you had your hand up, and then George.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, do you know what? It's really good to hear all of this, right? I think, look, I've put 2 diagrams in there, right? There's a bit more to this as well. This was around design and build, because best way to explain it is that because I've had to go down the product routes for loads of different products, and don't get me wrong, it was never what I wanted to do. I had to do it because things were going wrong on sites, right? I mean, massively. You know, forgetting fire doors, it was ventilation products, smoke control, it was everything. And when you got down to root cause, when you look at, you know, just like dampers, really, you're protecting from left to right. The only time it becomes a systematic issue is where you've got risk of smoke through a building, which just changes the product class. So unless you schedule out what that risk is either side, and actually the whole risk of the building, you can't pick the product class. And I think the problem is when you look at advisors is that they don't know it either, and neither do the fire engineers fully, because they don't describe it, because they don't know how the product's classified to meet it. So it's got to be someone that brings the two together. When you look at things like fire resistant ducts and kitchen extracts, they're not the same. I'll tell you what, we've been through it now to the hill. You know, kitchen extract's all about fire risk and compartments through which it travels, not the start compartment. The travelling through one's more important because about fire breaking as well as fire breaking out. Whereas resistant ducts, you're carrying it. So unless it's put into a language and it's scheduled, like resistant ducts, unfortunately, you'd have to schedule them by the risk in the space and the risk at the start and the end points. That's what you'd have to do, like if left or right or in the middle. Whereas ducts is left and right and systematic, you know, sorry, for dampers. It's all different. And I think this is where the complications come in, is about how do you capture that? Who makes that decision? And how do you give it to someone that's going to advise you they think it's right? But actually, I think at the moment, in my headspace at the moment, is the advisors are working in reverse to say, well, you give me everything you've got and I'll tell you what I think. But are you thinking in the same systematic approach, or are you just looking at it going, well, you haven't told me what that product is? Because to be honest with you, we can all do that. It's getting to the point where you need a role for someone that can say, oh, today we're looking at the ventilation. What have we got? Oh, we've got resistant ducts. We've got a kitchen extract. We've got a smoke control system. Okay, give me the component schedules about how you got to classifications for the whole system against what the risk in the space is. And people will go, I don't know what you're talking about.
No, I think George, so just before I jump out, I think the thing to be mindful, Paul, in terms of the BSA PD role is that it doesn't it doesn't I will not know any of that stuff, but it doesn't need me to know and check and sign that off. So that is a very clear point that I think a lot of people thought that the BSA PD needs to somehow know everything about structure and ventilation and drainage and whatever. But as CDM, by the initial appointing the competent people in the first place, how do you define that? That's, you know, we'll have to work through. Is it through accreditations? Is it through everything else, tender process, etc.? But I see my role, for example, if it's again, not having gone through it in my mind, initially, yes, use the regulations to define what is relevant for that particular building and the context, and then have workshops with who I think maybe the relevant people to ask the correct the questions. And if it is a competent fire consultant, then the strategy should be pertinent to that use class and the size of the building, the use, the kind of the height of it, etc. And then keeping in mind the BSA PD is to design stage. So having gone through and worked with the M&E and the fire consultant, maybe in a workshop, to make sure those things are aligned, the signature, that the thing that I would have to sign is say that the design is compliant. If built, the contractors, I think, have a much harder role, because they've got to then take that design, which essentially is virtual still, and then sign something at the end saying we've built it and it's compliant. And they've got many more moving parts and people to check their competency, that they're actually installing things in the right place. For us, we can just draw a 60-minute, red line and say it needs to be 60-minute and whatever. But on site, I guess contractors are bringing in package-specific, almost clerk of works that work on their side, or quality assurance people who walk around and work with the fire damping specialist or the drainage specialist or the facade specialist, because everything is so specialized. You can't just have one person given the responsible to check and know knowledge everything. So I think the contractors have got a much harder role to be able to sign that bit of document at the end. It's in a way easier, but I see myself that role as very much making sure agree together the scope for the project, the regulations that I apply, and then have either more targeted workshops to ask the questions to get the responses. And if someone is obviously not competent and they're saying things which are clearly wrong, well, then that's a big issue. If they say things which are not true and they say it, well, then there's not much I can do. And obviously you have to take their word because you believe they're competent, because they've demonstrated that they were competent or something. So that's just one thing to be mindful of. I don't have to know all those fire stuff. I just need to make sure that the questions have been asked of the competent people and they've designed accordingly. George, sorry.
Yeah, so I just wanted to build on what Paul was saying earlier. I had a conversation yesterday with Brent O'Halloran, who don't know if you know him, but he was the director of asset management at Hyde, so quite a big housing association. And for the last sort of 4 years, he then went to Clarion and he set their building safety system up. And he told me yesterday, he's trained over 240 or so building safety managers. Yeah. Now, what he was saying was that there's a disconnect between the way he, as an asset manager or the director of asset management within a housing association, looks at things, and the way the BSM looks at things.
Excuse me.
And the way the Building Safety Act has been set up. What he was saying was that that Dame Judith was looking at it from a point of view of a building. She was looking at whether that building was safe, right? He said all of the systems that we have in housing associations and councils, I think, are looking across the portfolio. So therefore, what they're looking at is, do I have the right boiler certificates? Do I have it? Not for I've got them. I've got 100 buildings. So therefore, if I've got 98%, that's a good mark. It's not recognizing the fact that there's 2 of them that don't have it. Yeah. And and the same with all of the different aspects. They're designed, or they're managed in silos. And what he was saying was that therefore within the housing associations, the only people that are looking at the building itself is this new breed, the building safety manager, right? And he said it's a real challenge for them within that organization. And I thought that was, I've been doing this for a long time, and that was really, that's been my experience as well. But the way he articulated that, I thought was excellent.
I think that's in itself, that's a problem that can be overcome. We have the same sort of issue, but we basically map certain documents are portfolio wide, certain ones are estate wide, and certain ones are building specific. And we can kind of square that away, but in terms of the building safety case and the way it's formatted. But the fundamental question is the inflexibility of the building safety regulator and how they look at things and how their business is structured. They're just not capable of understanding, what it is they're actually looking at and making appropriate judgments. So, for example, one of the things you have to do is if something significant changes, you need to update the building safety case report. So we've submitted a building safety case report, and then on one of our buildings we've had a really quite substantial fire, and some things have changed. So we've got to update our building safety case report, which we've done. We're trying to submit it to the regulator, but they can't get their head around this at all. They're like, no, you can only submit it when we ask for it. And we're like, well, no, the Building Safety Act says we have to submit it to you when something changes, and something's changed. So, and they just cannot compute. And I've got an administrator sitting over there tearing her hair out with different WeTransfers and drop boxes and whatnot, and someone at the other end of the line that just doesn't understand.
Have you sent it to the fire authorities?
No,
because they're. I think there's this. Certainly, I'm confused between what's controlled under the building safety regulator and what's controlled under the by the fire safety, the fire people.
So I'm very clear on that, but the regulator gets confused quite a bit. So anything that falls under the Fire Safety Act, which is predominantly the fire safety order, the authority with jurisdiction is the fire brigade or the fire and rescue service, and anything that comes under the Building Safety Act, which is and the building regulations for HRBs, it's the Building Safety Regulator. But then we've additionally got the local council who have got authority under the Housing Act, and they have got a serious amount of scope creep, and they demand all sorts of things, like we've had one demand a safety case report, for example, and they demand various bits of information, which, a safety case report is a serious piece of work, and and they've demanded various other things under it, which it took 2 people 3 weeks to prepare everything they demanded, which was actually they don't have the authority to request that, actually, and it should be sent to the regulator, which it has been done. And it's not, but because of what they've asked for, you can't just send them the same thing. They've asked for it in a specific way that we've got to regurgitate it all. And, to be honest, I'm tired of being treated as the big bad developer who just wants to cut corners. We're trying our absolute hardest to do the right thing. And the regulator, they're trying to get us to demonstrate competence, and in the meantime, they're demonstrating a masterclass in incompetence. But I'm not allowed to say that because I'm the big bad developer, and politically that would be suicide. And I think the organisations that collect our views ought to be able to take some anonymous feedback back to government and say, look, something's got to change here because this is not working.
To a certain extent, that we can do that as BIM for Housing. We can anonymise it and go back. So I think we've got a collective voice.
I was just going to say, George, I think that's part of, now that you have gone through some of these pains, and I think Ben, you noted that you submitted a couple in February and not expecting anything back till October. I mean, these are useful information, good and bad experiences that I guess, George, we've got to figure out how we collate it into almost like a live feedback, whether it's internally or to other organizations. But I guess we can talk about that outside of this particular call. Paul, you had your hand up?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, just to your point earlier, look, because I've been involved in quite a lot, I think probably the best way I can describe this is that certain performances, I think sprinklers is a good one. You can actually describe it fairly simply. It's not overly complicated because it's about hazard categories in buildings, and someone can go away and design to that. The biggest thing that may affect you is the size of tanks if categories have been depicted wrong, so that's fairly straightforward. But I think when you come down to anything which is part of a systematic approach, with it's your your dampers, your fire resistant duct, your smoke control, your walls in that, your doors, you've got to go to the right level of performance, right? So you've actually got to describe the condition correctly. And I think this is the bit where I think everyone's getting a bit probably confused with it. It's not easy to do it because we don't specify in the right language at the moment. And that's, I think, just as a bit of caution, is that whilst I agree, you know, what you're doing as a PD, I fully get it. The role that's missing is the person that can take all of that and go, actually, that's the specific piece of kit, it's operation I need to go in that position in that building. And that works with all of these bits of kit, which perform like this, that go within that wall that performs like that. That's the bit that's missing. And that's the bit that's causing the most problem in construction at the moment, is that you find at the end of the job, you've got all of this kit inside the building, which may be installed correctly after a bit of jiggery pokery with walls, but it doesn't do the function for which it's required to because of the risk in the space or the building. It's been missed. That's the bit that's the panacea. That's the bit that we can't solve, if that makes sense, Andrew. That's the bit.
I think the that graph, the good old fashioned curve, it sort of alludes to that, because in fact on these 4 projects that I mentioned, the first one is completed and the second one sort of starting. What has been positive, I guess, for example, is that we've fed back to the contractor about the need essentially to shift a stage forward. And they have got the facade subcontractor, the M&E subcontractor, all involved at stage 4, not because of the HRB, just because actually there's a want from that contractor to do, I guess, that cultural change and the behavioral change, because they can see the value of doing it. So we, as an architectural point of view, I think we're going to be ending up going more prescriptive, and therefore less open to just choosing, which theoretically should help from a pricing point of view. The client knows what they're going to get, the contractor knows what they're pricing for, and they build their margins accordingly. So everyone's on the same. No one's trying to hide things or kind of make a quick buck. So the only way what you're talking about getting actual release is to pull everyone forward, but it's a harder thing to solve, and I'm sure the procurement team will be talking about that, especially if it's local authority, to be able to sign off that kind of spending before getting to financial close, let's say. So that's the way that we've tried to lesson learn on these 4 projects. It does seem to be helping, and that's all we can do, I think. Start and use that as a case study to share with others and say, look, actually, if you did this, the program didn't end up in real life being 2 years longer. It was actually on time, or maybe a month off or something, but not 2 years, not double, which is what has happened in the past.
Yeah, no, I can go. I think the interesting part here is that bringing things forward is part of the mix, and I think probably the best way to describe it is that if you look at the best example to use here, but if you look at just the ventilation, because ventilation is an easy one to pick on, for me anyway, right? But if you've got suppliers at the bottom that supply kit for ventilation systems, whether it's smoke control or dampers, or resistant kitchen extract, if they're involved earlier, it's great, but they still need to have an understanding from the relative person about what risks are required in what spaces, whether it's individual spaces or systematic risk, in order for them to give you a product that can meet the condition. And it's getting to that point where that sweet spot's done, where the performance is actually described specifically to the area, not as in because that sprinklers is quite generic. It's really OH2, OH1. It's easier to describe it when it comes down to some of these other products and spaces you're using. It's just not so simple. And sometimes I think people have gone to me, we're just going to go for everything in the kitchen sink, and you go, well, actually over specification can be more derogatory than under specification, depending what kit you're looking at. You've got to get it right for what you need to do, then choose what way up you want to go, not what way down you want to go. But you need to know whether that's actually going to work in practice. It's not just as simple as bringing them in. You still need someone to pull it together, and it's that bit, I think, for me, that's just missing. Because say fire engineers don't know products, the market knows the products they make and what they're tested to. The building service engineers, no respect to them, they don't know how the products are tested. They can't describe the performance of it. The manufacturers can, but they need to work with a fire engineer specific in each space in the building to get to that right level of product specification. And I think that's the bit that's really hard, because even if you go forward and you bring, I think there could be a mistake by bringing in just an MEP contractor. You might actually have to bring in product suppliers like we did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and go through with the product suppliers to get to that point. Does that make sense, Andrew? It's not, there's not one entity you can bring in at the moment as an industry role that can stitch it together. That's the problem that I'm seeing.
So one thing just on that, I was talking to a fire engineer, big fire engineering company, a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying that what they're now looking at, they are actually doing, is getting their fire engineers who normally would just do the fire strategy to actually drill down to the next level, to actually go into the detailed fire engineering and the like. So that might be something that, you know, I introduce you to, Paul, because they that's something that they've recognised as a gap in the market.
Yeah, and but not speaking too much about things like I'm involved in with ICSG and stuff like that. But I think we've gone through the products and realised that even some of our guidance that's existing isn't good enough. You know, just in certain people's guides, it doesn't go into the right level of, because these things are more complicated than I think, you know, we probably realised at the time. You know, so, and it's hard because I think that the bottom line for me is it's trying to prevent. I think you said it yourself earlier, Anna, when people come in and go, "Why did you make that decision? How did you get there?" Like the you know, the critic's the best person in the world, isn't they, who come late to the party. But the hard bit really is that you want to get to a point, and I've seen this, and I'll probably worth giving an example, George, where one building I was working on recently, looking at, won't say which one, but the decision matrix was basically this: they value engineered a slab from say 300 to 160 because they thought it was the right thing to do. But when you take all the big transformer rooms in the building, they were going to use non-load bearing walls. But the pressure required for blast out basically means the walls, unfortunately, there wouldn't be enough wall left to support the pressure relief doors. To go away from non-load bearing walls. But now you can't go back to load bearing walls because the structure can't take it. See where I'm going with this, right? And that's because the performance characteristics of the spaces weren't declared. It just wasn't known to get the whole systematic part of it right. Do you know what I mean? So they choose a different product which isn't tested with anything, so we're in a worse situation, you know. So, and you see it a lot with things like risers in buildings. You'll have steel frame buildings with encapsulation on steel and shaft walls, and you go, can't put anything in it. There's no to anchor anything. You can't run systems up it because there's no floor, and you can't put a floor in it. So it's those kind of levels of nerds we're trying to prevent earlier on. And I think putting that together is an hard one because there's multiple competencies and multiple skills required, and not all of it sits in, I think, in tier one contractors. A lot of it sits in individual excellence in supply chain or product manufacturers, and it's identifying what those are early enough and bringing them in. It's really hard, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's hard. Well, I'm conscious of time. Is there anything, Anna? Sorry, do you wanna?
I will have to jump. Sorry,
no, I think we all have to
in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Look, thanks for attending, and like I said, it will be useful. We need to kind of capture some of these little things that yourselves have talked about, and if there is a slide or a couple of words or whatever, do share them during the or the next session or something like that. So that's something we'll just put a call out for, if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, perfect.
Can I suggest something for discussion? One of the next meet. It doesn't have to be next meeting. Just because we're trying to grapple with this ourselves. What can and what can't be captured in models, in BIM models, in terms of useful fire strategy information? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because somehow the industry expects that everything can be, but not everything can. There are kind of story-like ontological kind of things that make a fire strategy compliant and a building compliant that are not necessarily captured in either scheduled information or geometric information. No. Yeah. And those are the ones that usually connect everything. And I'd like us to have a chat about how do we save them for other people? You know, do we write endless reports that somebody then reads? Do we have a play, a poem? What I mean is, like, these are the soft things that do not get discussed very much in the industry, and those are the ones that usually make the day.
So absolutely agree. And Anna, I'd like to have a chat with you offline about that, because that's where
Yes,
we're
please.
going as well. Because
Yes,
the
please.
other point is that people always think of BIM models as geometry.
Yes, and
Yeah.
they're not.
And
Well, they shouldn't
they
be.
are, but yeah, they are. But if you look, we're drilling into Uniclass at the moment, looking at ways that we can use Uniclass in more
Yeah.
innovative ways. And there are 12 tables in Uniclass.
Yes.
There's 12 tables, and most of them aren't about the building components.
No, true.
You've got activities, you've got all sorts of
Process.
range. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, correct.
So therefore, that we're looking at that, and also, as Paul was saying earlier, what's the space being used for? You know, what are the
Yeah.
activities that are being carried out in there? And these
Yeah.
are the things that never
Exactly.
get modelled.
No, they don't. And it's also it's really hard, because I think, not to delay this anymore, I think I've got various organisations thinking about 2D space risk. The next one's going to be, because of certain systems are transitional through buildings, whereas doors are sort of static to a space. What the transitional risk is in the building type. That's the next one, because you can get and don't get me wrong, you can get your S resistance wrong very, very quickly, whether it's risers because of protected shafts or whether it's ventilation systems. That's the two bits that are causing me a bit of a drama at the moment. It's getting people into that system thinking. It's really hard, because, you know, as you know, not to be disrespectful, as architects, you do need the engineering side on building services and things and fire to really support you with this. And at the moment, I think there's a bit of disconnect about how they see their responsibility around listing that performance out, or collating it, if that makes sense.
True.
No, it makes sense. Well, look, thank you very much, and
Thank you.
have a nice time, and speak to
No,
you
you
soon.
too. Good to see everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
And if you're
Bye-bye.
London Build, I'll see you at London Build, guys. All right.
Cheers.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Thank you.
You okay, George?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah. So
You're still recording at the moment, so you may want to stop recording for the minute.
yeah.